Maria Plateau is where many of the battles took place, because it's a plateau, for heaven's sake. The rest of Lesotho is mountainous. And that started my interest in Lesotho history. We also had a lot of the chiefs visit my father for various reasons, and he was instrumental in helping Leboa Jonathan win the first elections in Lesotho. So throughout my childhood, there was an interest in Mosheshwe and Sotho culture. And for my standard 9 and 10 years in history, we had to do a project over the 2 years, and I chose Mosheshwe. And I was lucky at the time to be able to access the archives in Maseru. And my father was fluent in Sotho, helped me to translate many of the scripts. So that really nailed it down for me. When I came to Clarens and met Dani Krauter, who's here today, where's Dani? There at the back. He lives at the site. In the background there you see the Mount Ararat. That little kopje is Mount Ararat, and at the foot of Mount Ararat, on the other side, is Dani's farm, where he produces Noah's cheese. So on the southern slopes of Mount Ararat is the farm Boshoek, where the actual battle took place. It's known as the Battle of Naaupoort Neck, but it was actually on the farm Boshoek. It took place on the 29th of September, 1865. It was part of the Setriki War. I'll say something about that in a moment. And Chief Leswana, who had a large big place, 5 kilometers outside of Clarens, at the current farm St. Fort, was known as Leswana Stad with a T, although on the maps it's indicated with a D. It's not a city, but it's the STAT in Afrikaans refers to the headquarters of a tribal chief. And there he had his headquarters, but he was a bad boy, a really bad boy. He was the son-in-law of Mosheshwe, and therefore he was protected. And although he did many bad things according to the farmers in the Free State, Mosheshwe never really got to grips with him because he favored him despite what he was doing. The battle was fought between him and Commandant General Paul Kruger from the Transvaal Republic. And what was he doing there? Heaven alone knows. He just camped for the night. But we'll get to that in a moment. The Setriki Wars that started in 1865 between the Free State Republic and the Basotho was the second Basotho War, and it was called Setriki because of the sound that the cannons made, Setriki, and that's where it got its name from. So on the 28th of September, as you can see from this arrow here, Paul Kruger and his men camped at 10 o'clock in the evening at the foot of Mount Ararat on the farm Boshoek. They were coming from Witsiershoek. They'd been to Witsiershoek. They left Harrismith on the 9th of September with wagons and, of course, horses, because 3 people from the Transvaal Republic had been murdered by the Batlokwa outside of Harrismith near to Witsiershoek. And despite the fact that President Brand at the time had asked several times for the Transvaal Republic to come and assist them in the war against the Basotho because they didn't have the manpower or the firepower to overcome them. They'd been turned down because the Transvaal Republic at the time had so many problems of its own with internal strife between the burghers and a power struggle, at one stage having two presidents and trying to sort out the financial mess that they were in, that they couldn't come down and help him. But when these three burghers were murdered, as they came across from Durban towards Pretoria, they were family members of the president, or the president who was the president at the time, who was Pretorius. Kruger was sent down immediately to go and sort out this moordenaarsnes in the Dutch, this den of murderers. So off he went to sort out the Batlokwa in Witzieshoek. Coming back from Witzieshoek, he moved to the base of Mount Ararat. 10 o'clock at night, light rain, dark, tired from the trip. They didn't even put out decent sentries, let alone put a laager together. They just slept in the wagons or in the ditches around, pulling something over their heads, until they discovered that they needed something for the night just to make them sleep better. Now, this is just an indication of the distance if you walk it slowly from St. Fort to the base of the mountain. Okay, so here near to the blue dot, that is the present town of Clarens, and you can see the 712 going to Golden Gate on the right-hand side there. And Naaupoort's Neck is right there in the center where the 5 hours 27 minutes is. Okay, so what happened was the battle took place at night, as I said, and then it moved all the way down to Naaupoort's Neck, but Kruger didn't want to pursue Letswana through Naaupoort's Neck because he feared that they were waiting in ambush for him, and so they'd lost their horses during the night, and they didn't want to do this all on foot. So they waited for assistance from Senekal, Paul and Bethlehem before they proceeded, which took a couple of days, and then they pushed Letswana across the border. So this is the battle, which is really at Mount Ararat, or Busoek if you'd like. They arrive at 10 o'clock at night, no formal laager, horses not hobbled, and they discover, as they're trying to get to sleep in this light rain, Skidammernat. Now, Skidammernat was the local brew of Dutch gin. And they started having copious amounts of Dutch gin to keep warm. One guy, Nijhoff, got totally out of control. And he loaded his rifle and he threatened to shoot everybody around him. And so Kruger said, tie him to an ox wagon wheel, which they did. And that was to calm him down. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning of the 29th of September, all hell broke loose. They were being attacked. 5 men were stabbed to death in their wagons, and they suddenly realized that they had to fight back. In the morning, as they saw in the light of day that they now had to pursue the Basotho on foot, because they were attacked not by the Batlokwa but by the Basotho, this guy was still tied to the ox wagon wheel. And he looked around and he said, "Het skijnt my was hier gevochten. It looks like there's been some kind of a battle around here." And he'd slept standing up, tied to the ox wagon wheel throughout the whole battle. So, right. Five guys were killed, 10 badly wounded, and the Basotho lost upwards of 50 men. The different sources give different figures. There you see a picture of Paul Kruger as he was photographed in 1865 as the Commandant General. He'd been through the wars himself in Transvaal because he first selected Schoeman to be the Commandant General. Then Schoeman wanted to become the next president just about, and started a rebellion against the president, had his own guy nominated. Kruger had to put him in his place militarily. He didn't want anything to do with the government and the war at the time, because he was newly converted to the Reformed Church, and he felt that he should not be part of a war. And they changed the law to be able to include people from the Reformed Church in government, just so that he could come back into government. And I mean, and this is his first task after all of this, coming down here to sort out the people in Qwaqwa, or at the time Witsishoek, and then of course here. Now, the political context was very simple at the time. As you can see, the British had the Cape Province to deal with, the Basotho had the Batlokwa to deal with, the Mantatisi, the Batawong, the Korana. The French missionaries were at their side to give them guidance. The Zulus were coming in and right up to Thaba Bosiu and wanting Moshesh to pay them tribute. The Ndebeles should actually be on the other side. They've moved through this part. They've destroyed so much. They are now in the north of the northern Transvaal, giving Kruger extra headaches there. The Transvaal Republic's bankrupt, and they have people all over the show going in different directions, and the Free State Republic has just been proclaimed. So in this political context, simple, we find that there are leaders now that have to make do with what they've got. The Basotho. Les Basotho ignorent leur origine, which means that the Basothos say they don't know where they come from. And that's a French missionary writing after speaking to Moshesh at length, trying to understand where do the Basothos come from. Well, Ellenberger, who worked for 45 years in Lesotho, wrote a book where he tried to find the lines of development of the Sotho nation. He said from the Zulu speakers that were included in the Basotho nation were the Mapetla, the Mapolani, the Maputi, the Bakwenas that came from Botswana, were the Bamokotedi, who, and that's a D, Bamokotedi, and it's also due to the French writing Sotho for the first time and confusing D's and L's like they always do. And that's the lineage of, or lineage of Moshesh. Then the Batlokwa, Mantatisi, the great prophetess who was the leader of the Batlokwa, and her son Sekonyela, known for being a cattle thief, according to Dingaan, who sent Retief to fetch the cattle because he was told by Moshesh that he couldn't pay the tribute because Sekonyela had taken the cattle. Long stories there. Bamonaheng, Letele was their chief. The Bafokeng, who played an important role in one of the first tribes to actually be in the Free State. Mokgatle was their big chief. And then the Batswana, Barolong, who were situated around Tabanshu, still are, under Chief Morocco. And the Batawang, the people of the lion from Mahoti. So these different tribes all contributed people and influences in language and in culture to forming the Basotho nation, which now celebrates this year 200 years. Past, present, and future. 23 groups, according to Musheshwe, made up the Sotho nation. So, all in all, a conglomerate of people right across the river here where we are is a little place called Pelindaba, where they still speak Zulu. If you go down to Muyeni, you will find that they speak Xhosa. But they're included in Lesotho, and they've always been. They speak Sotho and their native languages, but they've still retained their native languages. So Lesotho is actually the United States of Lesotho. Musheshwe, the great king. He comes from the lineage of Makotedi, and Piti was his grandfather, who was eaten by cannibals as they moved from Butabute down to Thabo Bosiu when they realized that they couldn't protect themselves in Butabute. He didn't kill the cannibals, but took them all with him down to Thabo Bosiu and taught them to eat vegetables. Changed them from to vegetarians because he said he couldn't kill them because he'd kill his grandfather twice. He'd been eaten and then he'd kill him again. So his initial name was Lepoko. There's no clear translation of that really, but it's more or less something like dust. That was not a great name for him. But he soon showed his mettle when he was looking after the cattle of Ramoki. That's right, thank you. And he was able to steal them while doing that without his uncle noticing. He shaved his beard while he was asleep. Shwe, shwe. And that's where he got his name from. And he liked it, so he kept it. 1820, he finds himself in Butabute, minor chief. 1824, he decides to move to Thabo Bosiu because he needs protection. He's been attacked by the Batwang and the Batlokwa, and he can't defend himself. The Batlokwa at the time were really quite strong, and they were marauding across the Free State until they were put in place by the Ndebele as they moved through on their way north. Justice, safety, and grace were the three values that he espoused. Justice, he didn't just put people to death. He listened, he decided. So he was not one of those gung-ho guys who just wiped everybody off the planet. Safety for his people was paramount in his mind. And grace. He had a gracefulness in dealing with people, even the lowest in his sphere of influence. He was known for his diplomacy and for his destruction. Now that sounds as if I'm contradicting myself, but when diplomacy didn't work, he could be ruthless. And Sekonyela is a case in point. Sekonyela was playing with the cat's tail until this cat turned around. And although he was a member of the cat family, Musheshwe then sorted him out. And when he did, they climbed up the back of Jwala Bohulu, the mountain of Sekonyela, in a rainstorm with ropes. They had a guy who could climb like a baboon, they said, and he went to the top, tied the ropes to the top, and they all sailed up to the top and attacked them from behind and drove them down the mountainside, but they were waiting for them at all the drifts as well. and they slayed them, so that Sekonyala and 8 of his family made it to Major Warden in Bloemfontein to seek protection. And Mac Sekonyala was on our farm. He was an amazing man, a tracker, but also a man with many stories. And he was a grandson of Sekonyala. And out of the 8, they sort of rebuilt the clan again, but they never attained their greatness again because Moshoeshoe destroyed them. He saw wealth in people and cattle. He invested in people. He would welcome anybody into his tribe. If you were prepared to recognize him as your king, you could stay on. He had a system of loan cows. If you didn't have money to buy milk, if you were poor, he'd give you a cow. It was his cow, but you could have the milk. And so he placed cows all over Lesotho with poor families, and they were his. And this concept of loaning was transferred to land. When the first farmers moved in, white farmers, they loaned his land. And so the Divinars who started Zastron would give him a bag of peaches every year as part of their loan of the grounds around Asvolkop in Zastron. The Difatkani, the wars of attrition. There are people who say it never really happened that way. But according to him and the missionaries, it did happen. But this was a clash of people moving, and many people moving. It wasn't just one great trek coming in, but it was treks all across. Okay. Basutoland 1858. This is the map that was drawn to indicate where Lesotho or Basutoland was at the time. You see Morija, Thabo Bosiu. Up there is Imperani Mountain, where Vicksburg is today, and Merwe, where there was a Wesleyan mission station. So it's not a large tract of land. But then Moshoeshoe started laying claim when there was no more war, and he'd sorted out everything to almost the rest of the Free State. And this is where the problem lies. Now, this is a compound map, and I'm not going to dwell on it too long, but in 1843, Napier said, well, okay, you've got to acknowledge the fact that white people are coming into your country. They did. That was the treaty. Warden drew the line in 1849. Right at the top, you can see the Warden line. And he said, below that is Lesotho. Well, that was much more than the initial one that you saw. Okay, you see Imperani is there, etc. Then they decided to, after the Battle of Viervoet, make the Orange River sovereignty part of Her Majesty's land in Africa. They soon realized after the Battle of Viervoet and Berea that they couldn't hold on to it. It was too expensive, so they gave it back to the farmers, and they said, okay, in the Treaty of Bloemfontein, the Bloemfontein Convention, you can take your land back. The Free State was formed as an independent republic. Then there was the war in 1858. Treaty of Allowell North. This is a treaty war. That's wrong. It should be an I. The 1866 treaty followed that, at the Treaty of Thabo Bosiu. It's all on there. Then 1867 was treaty number 2, or the third Basotho War, if you like. Treaty with Woodhouse reached in 1868, and Woodhouse then makes Lesotho protectorate of Her Majesty. And in 1969, they finalized the Treaty of Allowell North number 2, and those are the borders that we have today, the Moakari River, or the Culloden River, as it's called. And in 1870, Moshoeshoe dies. Okay. On the British side, there was Lord Russell, Lord Palmerston, a lot of people. I'm not going to go into them. Battle of Boomplaas, Sand River Convention, where the Transvaal Republic was allowed sort of self-government. The Battle of Viervoet, Berea, Cathcartsdrift, and the Free State becomes the Free State. There's President Brand, 1854. They get a land without borders. The British give them back the Free State, but they don't tell them where the borders lie. And that's where the problem starts. So now they've got a country. It's officially the Free State Republic. President Hoffman, who is a cripple, and his secretary, who's also a cripple, known as the cripple government of the Free State, start the Free State off, and he then provides gunpowder to Moshesh, and he doesn't tell the Raad. Oh boy. And then his state secretary, a brilliant guy, Hammelberg, you can't stay on, you've got to leave. And Witzy has an uprising. So Hoffman decides this is too much for me. And he gets out, and Boshoff becomes the new president. And just after he's the new president, they have to start a war against the Basotho, because the Basotho are stealing everything that's on the farm that's loose, and they're also starting to murder people. So they decide, okay, war and losses, terrible losses. I mean, the Free State's annihilated as far as the animals are concerned. Treaty of Aliwal North. Then this crazy thing happens. Martinus Wessel Pretorius, son of Andries Pretorius, the great Trek leader, has a vision that the people in the Free State should actually allow him to be their president as well as the president in the Transvaal, because his dad told him that this was the right thing. And the funny thing is the Free State acquiesces, and he's president in both places until the Transvaal says, you're neglecting your work, come home. We'll give you 5 months and then you've got to be back. And the Free State says, Hammelberg says, I don't like you and you shouldn't be here and you've messed up our province or our state, go back. And they then decide on J.H. Brand that they find down in the Cape and make him their president. And the big problem creeps in. Lesuana, the guy that we met right at the beginning, and Moshesh can't keep him under control. And he goes on raiding parties into the Free State so that they raided something like 20,000 sheep, 100,000 head of cattle, 30,000 horses. I mean, they cleaned out the Free State. Masupa, Lesuana, and some of the other brothers. Letsia was the only one who wasn't part of this, and they forced the war. Brand has only been in the seat for a year, and they have to start this war. What's the economic context? Well, the Orange River sovereignty couldn't exist. The British said, this costs too much to run this place. We'll give you £10,000 just to start you off. Bye-bye. And so they started this republic, and they tried their best to make a run of it. So we talked about Pretorius. That was the craziest thing, but he neglected the Free State, and he left them with so many problems that it was just impossible to continue with him. He hobbled the agriculture in the Free State because he was forever doing work that was supposed to be to the benefit of Transvaal. He wanted a federation. He wanted them to, and the Free State didn't develop their agriculture as they should have. The border raids and the wars were taking their toll on the Free State, and he couldn't face that because he had to face other problems in the north of the Transvaal. And so the development of the Free State was impacted negatively. They had to get rid of him, and when they did, they started to develop towns and agriculture and industry. And then, of course, the diamonds were discovered. But that's a later story. What happened in Basutoland in this economic context of what happened here? They were losing their land. Question mark. Were they? Or was this a claim by Moshoeshoe that was beyond what he really possessed? Which it seems to be. But anyway, they were producing a lot of vegetables in Lesotho. The potatoes still are the best in southern Africa. And they were feeding the Free State, so they were producing food and they were getting money for that. They had cattle and they provided labor. Many of the Basotus decided to go and work on farms because it was a quick way to make money so that you could buy cattle and become somebody of stature in your society. Compensation was for all the raids was a constant problem for Moshoeshoe. He had to pay for all these things. He often didn't. He would talk his way out of it, and then they'd have another talk about it, and it led to war. But it had an impact on the Basotho. Apart from killing people, it also destroyed infrastructure. Villages were burned to the ground, and the missionaries were facing the problem now that the Free State government was saying, we want you out, because you are instigating all the problems that we have, and the Transvaal was bankrupt. So that's the economic context of what happened out here at the mountain. And of course, as you can see, agriculture was being threatened by droughts, snow, thick snow that they couldn't do anything for quite a while, as well as the locusts. And instead of eating them like the people in Botswana did, they just looked at them and saw their crops disappear, both in the Free State and in Lesotho. What's the agrarian context? I'll be quick. The result of the Great Treks, all this movement, was the redistribution of land and people. Tribes that existed no longer existed. People were fleeing all over, and because of the mountains, they found safe haven in Lesotho, and they found a benevolent leader who was prepared to take them in and look after them and even give them a feeding scheme so that they could exist. This was a time of flux, and nothing was certain, nothing was fixed. At the cave Kormo in Lesotho, if you ever go to Kormo, it's a wonderful tale. This guy and his wife and child fled into this cave, and they heard a noise, and they were very careful. They were fleeing from one of the attacks of the Zulus, and there was somebody living next door behind the trees in the same cave. And for months, they knew about each other, but they never met because they were afraid that he might put me to death, or he was afraid I would put him to death, until one day at the waterhole, they looked at each other and they started talking two different languages, and they formed a union. And this is the story of Lesotho. And those same people, their offspring, still live in the Kormo caves today. Okay, so yeah, natural disasters were playing a havoc in the agrarian context. Poverty was rife. The terrible stories of poverty at this time. Hunger was all over, because they're burning down fields of the Basotho, burning down the fields of the farmers in the Free State farmers burning down the fields in Lesotho, and droughts coming in after that, and it really made life very difficult for everybody, and pestilence, rinderpest, coming in, and of course the locusts, and all kinds of things happening. So the agrarian context was difficult. If you depended on soil for a livelihood, you had a problem. So the Bloemfontein Convention comes along and gives this land to these people, but nobody else is consulted. And surely, if you are doing something like this, your neighbor should know that you're getting the land next door to him, and he was never told. And the problems, agrarian problems, also lie there. And then the Maloti. the mountains of Lesotho, where the Basotho could actually move to when they were attacked. They moved into the mountains and they were safe. They could make gardens in the mountains, which you couldn't touch because you didn't know where they were. They were in valleys. They could plant maize there, which you couldn't touch. And so the agrarian context made it possible for the Basotho to continue the war, whichever war it was. And therefore, when Lesotho attacked Paul Kruger that night, there was no fear in his heart of what the retribution might be. They could burn down St. Fort, where he stayed. He could burn it down himself, like Masupa did when they were gathered together at Retief's Neck outside of Bethlehem, together with the Free State and Transvaal to go and attack him. Because you just go into the Maloti and you're safe. And then you plan where you're going to build your next headquarters, and that's what they did. So the agrarian context really helped to, on the one hand, save the Basotho, and on the other hand, impoverish the Free State, because the Free State was open to that. I thank you.